Bob Costas' guest on Later with Bob Costas on November 18, 1991, was similarly youthful appearing Mike Lupica, and the two sportscasters were discussing the just breaking story about Magic Johnson's HIV diagnoses. Lupica, ironically, was at Costas' house and got into his car in the driveway and found out that Magic's flu virus that had kept him out of the first few games was indeed HIV. And they talked about the historical significance of Magic's tragedy, that because he was such an accepted figure culturally across every group of people, that it finally could bring the American public's consciousness to the fact that HIV was not just a gay or drug abuser's disease. It was a human disease. And maybe it was supposed to happen that somebody that huge became the face of normalcy for HIV. This is a pretty cool time capsule. Mike Lupica might not be the kind of, name that draws you into clicking on the video, but you should. You should watch it.
Thanks for staying up later. And the natural question might be, how do these two kids get to stay up this late? Perhaps we'll answer it as bookends here as the half hour goes along. This is Mike Lupica, sports columnist for the New York Daily News and for Esquire magazine, author of several books. And despite his appearance, he's been covering sports for close to 2 decades. Have you ever seen a story that comes close in importance to the Magic Johnson story?
No, I think it's the biggest story of my life, and it's the biggest shock of my life. You're going along, and Magic Johnson's been sick, but he's getting ready to start a new season. And as a matter of fact, we've just been playing touch football with our 2 sons on your front lawn. I get into the car, I'm on my way home, and I hear that he's going to announce his retirement from basketball. And because of the flu, right away I did think about AIDS for no reason except the times in which we live.
Just to set it, the story had been, when he missed the first 3 regular season games, that he had the flu.
Yeah, and I get home, and I hear that he's calling a press conference to announce his retirement. At that point, it hasn't moved on the wire that he's HIV positive. I go into my house, a friend in the news business calls, asked me to appear on television that night, and I said, what's going on? And he said, wait a minute, somebody just handed me a piece of paper. And he said, oh my God, Magic's tested positive for HIV, and he's going to announce his retirement, at which point I put down the phone, I called you, I think you were the first person I told, and realized in a way that I didn't really grasp at that time that the world had changed. This was beyond an athlete, it was beyond any awareness that we'd ever had of the disease. The world had changed, and it's going to stay changed for quite some time.
It's been said before, but bears repeating. There has never been, or at least seldom has there been, an athletic package like Magic Johnson, in that he was an 80s and 90s celebrity who could walk out on the Arsenio Hall show and looked like he belonged there as one of Arsenio's homeboys. But by the same token, you could place him as the athlete in a Norman Rockwell painting, and he'd belong there as a latter-day Stan Musial patting a kid on the head. And it's that combination of qualities and the ability to reach people across all cultural and age and income circumstances that makes him so uniquely well-suited, if he is to be struck by this tragedy, to reach people.
With Magic, standing there and matter-of-factly announcing that he had the virus, Magic smiling on Arsenio. With all of that, this hit this country, I believe, like a death in the family. And without any connotation, he's gonna live with the disease like millions of other people live with the disease. But it felt like it. This was the first time that AIDS came to everybody's house. Came right up, knocked on your door, and walked in the middle of the day. There was AIDS. Wasn't out there anymore. Wasn't something that just was a homosexual disease or a drug addict's disease. AIDS came calling on America as soon as he stepped to the microphone. And now this face that you're talking about, this extraordinary face, and everybody's talked about his smile since then. All of a sudden, we put that face on AIDS for the first time, and this story will not go away. There are people who have suggested that this story won't have any legs, that it will die out because in our culture, there's only a certain shelf life to these stories. This isn't going to go away because Magic Johnson's beauty as a basketball player and as an athlete was that you couldn't take your eyes off him. And now you can't take your eyes off somebody with the HIV virus.
What do you think it says about us in general, and perhaps about the sports media, that it took this for AIDS to come knocking at our door? I mean, certainly we're all aware that it was a terrible epidemic, that it took a frightful human toll. We all would have said, because it's the right thing to say, that we feel compassion for whomever is afflicted, regardless of their circumstances or their lifestyle. But everybody knows that the way we view AIDS now is different than it was a week to 10 days ago.
Yeah, in the first rush of, you know, everybody in our business getting asked for some sort of reaction on camera, you know, we live in the age of the soundbite, so everybody's asked to sum this all up in about a 7-second soundbite. Somebody said to me, why has the media reacted finally and so powerfully to AIDS? And I said, guilt. Guilt. Because I'm not saying that, you know, as a sports columnist, I'm going to be writing about AIDS all the time. But there was a way to be aware of it that I never was. I mean, I occasionally in the New York Daily News will move up to the front of the paper, the news side of the paper, and write, quote, real-world columns.
And you have written about AIDS.
I have written about AIDS. My brother-in-law works at a hospital in New York City in a Families with AIDS project. I went to a quite remarkable Mother's Day party. Some of the mothers having the virus, some of the kids having the virus. That is one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. And they brought in a little girl that day who was thin beyond imagination, had been born with the disease. She was 7 years old. She wouldn't live out the month. Her name was Delia. I have a drawing at home that they gave me after I wrote this column with her drawing a stick figure of herself, you know, a self-portrait, and 2 little dots of light, because she was aware that she was moving towards the light. And so it's not like I've ignored it, but one column doesn't make me any sort of activist or anybody who can sit here and say to you, you know, I know. You know, I've treated this subject with the seriousness and the attention that it deserves. But we've ignored it. You know, we haven't wanted to look at it. And now we can't look away. All of a sudden, the disease that not enough people want to talk about belongs to an athlete, a virus that everybody knows about. And if that doesn't affect you, if that doesn't make you realize that we're all in this together, I don't know what it's going to take.
I'm sure that no responsible reporter wants to get into or encourage anybody else to get into gossip about an individual person's private life. But did the sports media do a poor job of reporting the general truth of promiscuity among athletes, not just at present, but through the years?
You know, I'm not sure how you do that. I'm not sure how you do that and do a service to what your job is supposed to be and your service to the reader. I mean, really, what were we supposed to say in the sports media? Magic Johnson had 32 points, 14 assists, and may have exposed himself to AIDS after the game last night at the Forum, which the Lakers won 114 to 102. I mean, how do you cover this? How do you cover what the stage door looks like when these athletes come out?
Well, the second part might be valid. The first part clearly isn't. No one would suggest that we should talk about individuals unless somehow they wind up in the headlines unavoidably because they're arrested, or in Magic's case, the story is thrust upon us. But once AIDS became a factor in this nation's life, some of us perhaps could have said, these athletes, even heterosexual athletes, are peculiarly at risk because of these circumstances that exist. No names, just a description of the circumstances.
But maybe it was always going to take this. I mean, maybe it had to become a reality. Maybe it had to become something that you could put a face and a name, and who knew that when it would happen, it would be someone who arguably is the most famous athlete in the world. And I'm not sure this would have had as much impact if it had been anybody else. Michael Jordan or Larry Bird or anybody else, just because Magic has been our friend in sports for so long. I mean, you know, you can't remember a time when you didn't know about Magic Johnson. We weren't talking about his smile, going all the way back to Michigan State. I can't imagine another athlete that would have hit the country and the world, except maybe if this had happened to Ali when he was in his prime, if there were such a thing as AIDS then, you know, back in the 60s and 70s, because the force of his personality as you were saying before, is what just hit everybody so hard. And I can't remember a time in my life when a sports story was on front pages of papers all over the world, not just the country, the world. And I don't know who else could have done that.
And even Ali, although he was the most famous man in the world and arguably the most popular man in the world, he was always a controversial figure and threatening to some. Magic transcended all the divisive factors and was someone that everyone felt comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, last year, I finally got a long sit-down with Magic Johnson. It was something I'd been trying to do, and for reasons, his reasons and my reasons, I couldn't do it. I mean, I read in the New York Times last week that he has relentlessly courted the media. Well, if he's relentlessly courted the media, it would have been a lot easier for me to get this interview. But the fact is, when I sat down with him, and I'd always been a huge admirer of him, just as an athlete, I liked him more than I thought I was going to like him. I mean, I've written all along that I think he's the greatest basketball player of all time, that I think his 5 NBA titles ranks right there with anything Bill Russell did with the Celtics because of the way the game has developed in the competition. But the fact is, here I thought was a guy who had moved across the American stage with as few false steps as you could have. Now, I wasn't hanging around with him after games. I didn't know what sort of promiscuous lifestyle he might be leading. Just what I was seeing as not even as a journalist, but as a sports fan. Here's a guy who, there were no skeletons jumping out of his closet. He was charming and gracious, and I never thought he tried to oversell himself. I mean, he wasn't trying to be anything that he wasn't. Good guy.
I really thought his public image was merely an amplification of things that were, for the most part, true about him. And even the people who would be close to it, who could be cynical if they wanted to, some of the old-timers who tend to be disdainful of the modern athlete, this guy was viewed as the genuine article by all of them. His athletic integrity, his personal ethic. Now, this is not a stamp of approval for his sexual activities, but that aside, which was not properly known to everybody at that time and shouldn't have been, it was his private life. That aside, this was as close to an unblemished public figure as I've seen, and it wasn't just image. It was the fact that he was a genuine article, and everybody of all different stripes had the same basic reaction to him.
Yeah, and established himself as a businessman, wanted to become a role model for all athletes, but particularly black athletes, to say, hey, listen, know what you're doing when you're playing, get yourself set up. He was setting himself up with the best possible agents and the right companies. But beyond that, Jerry West, who I always thought was the coolest guy in the room. I mean, just the coolest guy in the room as a player and one of the underrated front office geniuses in sports, has been unbelievably hit by this and emotional in a way that I've never seen him. The day after Magic's press conference, I left a message at the forum, never thinking that he would get a call back. He called back right away and started to cry a couple of times during the phone conversation. And I think that Jerry West is one of those people who is not particularly infatuated by the modern athlete and the way, you show up and you have a few good innings and you're elevated to superstar status. But here was the real goods, and he knew it. Here was the realest goods, and he had had a ringside seat for years. And he was saying to me that he thought that in an odd way he was going to finally get the recognition for being this surpassing athlete because he got sick. He said that even up until then, he thought that Magic, for all the acclaim that he got, had never quite gotten his due. That if you ask people who's the best basketball player in the world, that not enough people would say Magic Johnson. And West was knocked down by this in a way that was very moving to me. And because he wanted, it's like he wanted to shout, take a look at this guy now, because we're never going to see anything like this ever again.
Pull him up, get him legal. Magic looking to go down the middle. He's in low. No, and a pass to Perkins, score. To the Lakers for a 4-on-2 break. Magic gives the Blade, slam dunk. Magic fires and hits a three-pointer. Now Magic's got it. Bounced out the middle of Worthy. No look. Bounce pass. Score. Steal by Magic. Here he comes. Here comes Benjamin. Slam dunk. Magic is really in this game.
Mike Lupica of the New York Daily News and Esquire magazine. For all of his wonderful qualities, as an athlete, and as a person, which no fair-minded person disputes, you have heard a few compassionate people say, even as they take great pains to point out, we admire Magic for all these reasons. We admire his courage and his grace in handling this adversity. We think he can help move things in the right direction by his presence and by his advocacy. Even as they say all these things, they say we're uncomfortable with him as a role model, because after all, a segment of his life should not be held up as a model, and they almost feel as if he has to repudiate that segment of his life to really reach kids.
Well, I'll tell you something. This is a very complicated issue, and heroism and tragedy in life often collide in a way that it is difficult for us to understand. Nobody gets AIDS heroically. Nobody gets AIDS in a way that anybody would want to emulate. I mean, you get it tragically, you get it stupidly, you get it because of promiscuous, you get it for all sorts of reasons, but you don't get it heroically. But once you've got it, then you can wear the armor of heroism, and that's the opportunity that he's got. No, but you can't say, oh, he's some role model now. Well, you know what? The minute he stepped to that microphone in the forum that day, everything changed. I wrote one column I wrote in the Daily News because I was sort of fascinated by this. I talked to a lot of people who were backstage with him before he walked across the lobby to the Forum Club, because I wanted to know what those last minutes were like. Because even though he knew that he had tested positive and had known for some time, once he went into that press conference, one life was ending, and a new life was beginning. And the thing that David Stern and Jerry West and some other people told me was, that face that now goes on the virus, that face that we saw at that press conference, that was the face back there too. Now, there's some nobility attached to that, and there's class and grace and all the things that you would want to have a hero be. He has shown in the 10 or 11 or 12 days since then, he has shown those things. How he got it does not become as important as how he lives with it. And that'll be the trick for Magic Johnson. And off of what we've seen from him in the arena his whole life, it's not unreasonable for us to expect the best.
For the most part, the response to Magic Johnson's situation has been, first of all, appreciation for what he has been, compassion for what he now faces, and extreme admiration for the way he has faced it thus far. But mixed in, there have been at least a few comments that lean toward cynicism. Somebody wrote in the New York Times that this just shows, again, if we want to pay attention to it, that sports world is as real as a cancer ward.
Yeah, I mean, it's just nonsense. That to me is prattle. I mean, why is it that every time something bad happens in sports, that's reality? But all the other reality of Magic Johnson before that doesn't matter. All the joy that he himself felt about basketball and so easily transmitted to the fan, that's not reality.
The thrust of this was, that was hype. That was something that was cynically and slickly sold, but now comes reality and truth.
Well, I mean, who says? Who says? I mean, people who say that are just out of touch with not only with the realities of sports and the modern athlete and the way sports has evolved, but they're out of touch with their own feelings about sports. And you know, I just have a tremendous problem with all these so-called sports sociologists. I just wonder if they ever have any fun. If they ever go into the arena like I do every time I go there, whether it's a football game or a basketball game or a baseball game, thinking this is going to be the night I see something I never saw before. And if you can't appreciate that that's the reality of Magic Johnson, as much as what happened to him when that test came back, the positive test, then find other work. Go cover something else because this is the wrong area for you.
In general, and I think this indictment especially applies to television, we don't spend enough time on the journalistic aspects. We don't spend enough time on the problems and the real ills of sports. You know, we carry thousands of hours of college sports and never look at the corruption that's rotting that institution from within. All that is valid, but that doesn't invalidate the goosebumps you get when you walk out to watch the Final Four. It just doesn't. It doesn't invalidate the goosebumps you get when Jack Morris hooks up with John Smoltz, and it might as well be 1941 as 1991. That's just as real.
Oh, let me tell you something. You want to know what a reality is in sports world? That I'm mad at Magic Johnson because I never get to see him play another basketball game, perhaps. I mean, John D. McDonough was one of my favorite writers. Once was talking about how we sometimes don't value things until we've lost them, or we sometimes don't value them because they become so routine. And his point was, if you knew there were only going to be 6 sunsets your whole life, how important would it be for you to see those 6 sunsets? There are only 25 seashells in the whole world. How valuable would they be? Well, I wanted some notice about this, you know? I would have watched that exhibition game in Paris because it would have become an important ceremony of sports. I wasn't prepared to lose this guy as an athlete because this was still a work in progress. After 5 NBA titles, after the most famous college basketball game ever played, he was 32 years old as a player. Not anyway am I talking about him in the past tense. He's 32 years old, and people had sort of forgotten already that he went to the finals last year. And if maybe things go differently in the 3rd game when it's still 1-1, who knows how it turns out. I'm mad. I would go anywhere to see Magic Johnson play another basketball game. And I'll take him at his word. If he says he's going to put on a uniform in Barcelona, maybe that is foolhardy. Maybe he's kidding himself. But if there's a chance, I would go watch that basketball game.
How should the coverage of Magic Johnson's situation proceed? This is pretty much uncharted territory.
I think we got to follow him. You know, we got to keep our eyes on him. Watch the ball, see what he does. Watch the play, see what he does in the open court now. I don't know whether he'll tour schools. I don't know whether he'll go to Washington. I said to you before the show, I believe that there is a dramatic moment coming, as dramatic as his press conference. Well, he will stand on Capitol Hill and talk about AIDS. Because the fact is that for all the good he's done just in this short time, we still got a president who wants to slap his forehead and say, wow, how long has this AIDS thing been going on? Why didn't Sununu or somebody tell me?
And a predecessor who literally never spoke the word.
Yeah, it wasn't in his vocabulary. He's got to get their attention because God bless Rex Chapman of the Charlotte Hornets, who immediately contributed $50,000. I think the NBA will get behind the AIDS Project and organizations like that. I love the idea of this Fund 32 that Magic is talking about. But until Magic, you know, hits him right in the head with the ball on Capitol Hill, then maybe nothing's going to change. So we got to stay with him. We got to follow his lead. But in the past, following Magic's lead hasn't been such a bad idea.
Be back in the near future. We'll talk about sports in general under more pleasant circumstances, but thanks for being here tonight.
Okay, I'd like that.
We're out of here for now. See you later.
Thank you for watching Cleveland Live Music. If you like what you see, hit the subscribe button. And in the video descriptions, there's further support options listed. Thanks for making the channel grow so much. Really appreciate it.